Hi everyone, hello everybody on the call, and thank you so much for joining, and welcome to another episode of our Crisis Clinic, where this time we will discuss agency remuneration, also called compensation, at the time of the virus. So we want this session to be interactive. So to get you trained with our polling function, I have a few questions for all of you before I ask questions to our panelists. So Hannah, if we could get just the very first question, please. Do you feel right now you're getting value for money from your agencies? Great, so that's quite positive and quite in line with our reports on agency remuneration. Stuart, see you looking at the results, but yeah, it's great. Thank you so much, Hannah. And you should be able to see me on the camera as well as our speakers. But just to put faces to names, so I'm Laura, I'm on the left side, and together with my colleague Hannah, we're going to make sure that this webinar is run smoothly. And on the right of the screen, so our two great guest speakers, so Stuart Pocock, owner and managing partner at the Observatory International, and Matt Semple. I hope my French accent is not destroying your names, guys. Matt Semple, International Lead Media Management at Ubiquity. So both the Observatory International and Ubiquity have been official strategic partners of the WFA for years now. So thank you so much for you both, for giving us a bit of your time today. Before we get to the questions that we received from you all, I would like to introduce the WFA for those of you who are less familiar with our organization. This is us. We are a not-for-profit membership organization. We've been around since 1953, so it's been 67 years. And since then, we've been representing the interests of our members. And as you can see on the screen, our members represent around 180 companies. So it's a combination of global brand owners, and they represent about 2/3 of our membership. It's about 120 of them as we speak. And we also welcome National Association of Advertisers in our membership, who also represent the interest of their members at a national or country level. And yeah, so thank you again so much for joining, and welcome to the 70 of you today. So since we represent the interests of our members, our agenda is fully driven by our members' priorities. Obviously, this shouldn't appear as a surprise to you, but COVID-19 is having a big impact on our members and industry in general right now, and we want to provide as much support as we can. So we have created a series of webinars. You can replay them all on our website, but also research documents, top tips to bring value at the time of the virus. They're all available on the website. And that's today, so where we will focus on agency remuneration. Talking about remuneration, I'm going to be a bit provocative, but do you feel we're talking too much about it with our agencies right now? And do you feel this may have a detrimental impact on your relationships with your agencies? That is quite, I mean, it's quite alarming and positive at the same time that you're sort of aware that we're talking too much about it. So it's 50-50%, I'd say. So thank you so much for sharing. So on top of organizing webinars, we also run benchmark and research to help our members navigate these testing times. So most of you have probably already seen this chart. This is to give a bit of context and impact of COVID-19 on marketing budgets. So what we saw is that global average budgets were down by 36% on the first half of 2020, obviously to varying degrees across regions. We're running a third wave of research, if you'd like to provide your views and update these figures. I'm sure we can copy and paste the link to the survey in this chat. I'll do it when I'm done with the introduction. About 5 weeks ago, we also reached out to our members based in China to better understand how they maintained good relationships with their agencies during and after COVID-19. So some of them told us that they have already started to adapt their agency performance evaluation and KPIs to reflect their agency's actions and support to their business during the crisis. Some WFA members have also started to reward the agencies who helped them the most during the crisis. And this is leading me to my last question to you guys on the poll. So, do you feel that changing your current agency remuneration models would improve the relationships that you have with your agencies? So yeah, it's quite a lot of good degree of need for change as well here. 53% is the biggest number. Thank you, Hannah. So these questions were part of our former agency remuneration research that we led with Stuart about 2 years ago. So if you're into global agency remuneration, I really encourage you to go and check our most recent report on the matter. So this is something that we wrote together with Stuart, and some of the principles are completely independent of COVID-19 and still apply. So, you know, even if you have questions about overheads, average percentages, etc., this guide is for you, and hopefully will be useful. This is another, I'm sorry, I'm doing a bit of marketing right now, but this is another report that I'd like to encourage you to download. This one is very recent, so this is from last month. And we got in touch with 60 agency executives to better understand their feelings around performance evaluations. So what KPIs do clients use and agency like? What are the ones that they hate? Which areas should be considered when evaluating the performance of agencies? It also includes some insights on remuneration models and what ways you as a brand can use to reward your agencies without involving a traditional financial bonus. So I'll let you check it out as well, and the link is on the slide. Thank you. Right, so that's enough for me. Matt, Stuart, if you're happy to unmute yourself, I'm going to get started on the questions that we received from our members. Interestingly, we didn't receive that many compared to the amount of attendees, which is probably the best because we wouldn't have been able to go through 80 questions anyway. So we've got 11 questions. So I'll get started with the first one. So whilst some agencies put their staff on furlough, should I expect a change on the model and level of remuneration that was initially negotiated? So I don't know, Stuart, if you'd like to get started with this.
No, absolutely. I mean, without question, 99.999 recurring % of agencies have put people on furlough because the workload's dropped dramatically. However, if your scope of work is the same, and you've got a discrete contract with your agency, and they're putting people on furlough on that, that's unlikely, because at the end of the day, those people will be needed to work on the business. But you might have situations where you've got, say, 2 account managers who are both working 45% of their time on various aspects of the business, and they put one of those account managers on furlough. Then that's fine, as long as they've topped up that other 45% by giving the other account manager 90% of his time or her time on the business. But the absolute reality is if an agency has put somebody on furlough, then they can't work, so they can't be billable, so you shouldn't be paying for it. So I think what you need to do, and I'm completely within your right to do so, is to talk to the agencies and understand who, and presumably this is all logged in your MSA or your contract, who are the assigned people to the business, what percentage of time they're dedicated to deliver, and so on and so forth, and understand who of those have been put on furlough and how they've been substituted, because certainly they shouldn't have been substituted by people of lesser qualifications or lower level. And if they're putting somebody of a higher level on there, then, you know, the fact of the matter is that's their choice, and they will have put people on, put more junior people on furlough. they shouldn't be charging you more for that, actually, because that's been pre-agreed. But yeah, I mean, definitely, if people have been furloughed, you shouldn't be paying for it. But if your scope of work is as is, and you haven't gone back in and renegotiated that, then it's unlikely the agency would have put the people on furlough anyway, because they're needed to deliver the business.
Thank you, Stuart. Matt, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, not too much more. I'd also just add to Stuart's points, just to say I think it depends on the type of model. So, for instance, if you've got a media commission model, you're not going to have a staffing commitment attached to that. If you've got an FTE or typically a fixed staffing model, then that's likely to come or should come with a named staffing commitment. So, yeah, as Stuart described, if someone has been put on furlough and you're working on an FTE model, I'd certainly expect, out of courtesy, the agency to have that conversation up front and to explain who the replacement would be. And if it's a case that they're putting that person on furlough because the scope's been reduced, then there should be a conversation about the implications on the fee as well.
Yeah. I mean, just an additional point on that. Actually, I'm sure agencies will argue, because a lot of people who are put on furlough, and this varies from country to country. Here in the UK, I think they're getting 80% of their salary, up to a level of £2,500 sterling. So that it's not a huge amount of money, and a lot of people are being paid in excess of that limit. So the agencies are still having to stump up the balance, and they may well argue, oh, well, we're still having to pay for these people, but it's not really an argument. It's not working on your business. If they're furloughed, they can't work on it.
If you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you the question that we received in the chat, because it's about this topic, because then the rest of the questions are a bit different. So the question we had is, so far we did to cut scopes, but we see people are not fully there. How to document people being reduced to part-time? As we are told, people are still on the job, but only part-time, only hard to reach because of home office and keeping the kids at home. Should we audit this, as it seems a bit strong under the COVID-19 circumstances?
I think you need to have a conversation with the agency, because if people aren't accessible, then that's going to get in the way of getting activity done. So they need to organise themselves so that the key movers on the business, the people who are directing the business or making sure stuff's happening, are available. It's very difficult if they're having to shut down. And one acknowledges it's an issue, of course, if you've got kids to look after and so on and so forth. But the agency should be able to organise it in a way which isn't affecting the client. It shouldn't really affect the client.
Yeah, as long as they can respect the SLAs and stuff like that, it doesn't really matter in the end what they do with their kids, right? Okay, thank you. Second question was also about reduction of budgets. So in the case of clients who are reducing their media budgets by, say, 30%, shall the media agency fee be reduced too? And if yes, by how much percent? So I guess, Matt, this is more for you, that question.
Sure, no, happy to take this. So, I mean, the first thing I'd say, this is unsurprisingly a very sort of commonplace question. So we've run our own survey internally. The second set of results came out, or are shortly about to come out. But looking at that, I mean, they were, with those, I think 84% of the advertisers that we spoke to said that for the remainder of 2020 they were reducing their budgets. So I think this isn't necessarily a linear equation, and you really need to kind of take a considered approach to this. So the steps I would kind of advocate with it are firstly to take your sort of start to 2020, what did your scope of work and your remuneration look like then? Secondly, you then have three areas that you need to have a look at. First one is to look from an internal perspective. So what are your forecasted ad spend budgets for the remainder of the year or going forward with that? Also, for instance, have there been any changes to your media management staff internally? So, perhaps you may have had some of your own team furloughed. People may have been moved into new roles. Are you going to need the agency to compensate for that? Second thing to have a look at or consider is the external, so the agency side of things. So what's your expectation of the agency? What do you need more or less of going forward? Which of that talent is mandatory and which is optional? And as I say, it's not really a linear equation, because it may be that your ad spend is reduced by like 30%. However, if you're still running the same number of campaigns, chances are you're going to need a similar number of planners to actually plan the work out in the first instance. Third thing to consider is the ways of working and how these are evolving or are going to evolve in the future. So think about that. For instance, you've obviously got less face-to-face meetings, there's less travel time between meetings. For the foreseeable future, international travel's being canned. Is that something that you pay the agency for as part of your retainer? So you've got those three areas to kind of consider. So the internal side, the external side, and the ways of working. Once you've had a look at that, that's going to give you your kind of parameters for your future model. And then you've got a kind of fundamental decision on whether your remuneration model remains as it is, or if you change it. So to give you an example with a budget cut, for instance, if you're working on an FTE or a fee-based model, if you're working on a commission-based model and you've cut your budget significantly, then having an FTE model where you guarantee the account staff to do the campaign planning and the scope of work may be more effective than the commission-only model. On top of that, you've also got other things to think about. So, which perhaps of your KPIs for the agency need to be revisited. Do you need to change the PRF or the performance-related fee to align with the new objectives? Does the scope of work need to be redefined? What are the contract kind of implications with it? And what's your kind of timeline if you are making changes for sort of renegotiating this with the agency? Once you're clear on all those things, there's obviously other internal stakeholders, be they media and marketing, that you need to align with before you go to the agency. But essentially, my advice with it would be, in order to kind of make a decision, ensure that you've considered all these areas and you're clear on the direction of where you want to go before you go to the agency. So the sort of that background work is really critical.
Thank you, and I'm going to read a comment that we received out of. I'm going to read it out of loud as well. I don't know if that may be an advice for some of you who are not doing it yet, but a member said our remuneration model already allows to take into account risk impact through scope reconciliation. So that may be a good way as well, instead of reducing straight away the agency fees, maybe to try to do some scope reconciliation and see what has been done. As you said, Matt, maybe but your budget's smaller, but you still have the same sort of amount of workload in the end. So
yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to one of the UK agency CROs earlier this week, actually, and he was saying that they're doing a lot of work helping advertisers replan a lot of activity. It's not necessarily work they get remunerated for. However, it's certainly work that the advertisers value. So I agree that there's that reassessment of scope as well.
Thank you. Next question, and this is a question that us WFA received a lot of requests about. We're going to talk about media inflation, and in that case, media deflation. So what may be, and I don't know if you're going to be able to answer that in like 5 minutes, but a big one, but what may be the impact of media deflation on agency remuneration models? Have we already seen some changes, and what can we expect moving forward?
Okay, so I mean, there's essentially kind of three sub questions there, so I'll kind of try and take them one at a time. But I think literally pretty much internally with our media performance team, virtually all the advertisers we work with who have pricing commitments as part of their incentive scheme are asking this question or kind of similar. I think one of the first things I'd say with this is the impact of deflation, and I know we've got pretty diverse audience from around the world, but if you look at, say, for instance, the UK, recently we've been seeing 40% deflation against certain TV channels across the last couple of months against certain audiences. So just need to be careful in the first instance when you're talking to your media agencies. They may well underplay the impact of deflation, quite simply because it makes it easier to hit pricing targets. So for that reason, we think it's really critical that you get an independent viewpoint on it to validate figures that you're receiving. In terms of have we seen some changes? What can we expect moving forward? I'd say that at the moment, most clients are trying to assess the impact of media deflation. So they're working with the same models and there isn't really a change. So the remuneration model or the incentive scheme stays the same, but they're working through in terms of how they better understand the impact of what's going on in the market. And the thing I think I'd say with this is it's highly fluid. And if you think about it on a per market basis, it's really as people come out of lockdown, the rate at which that's happening, and regulations are lifting, all of those have an impact on kind of deflation. So although we've got forecasts that go to the end of the year, and I've seen kind of Q4 forecasts, there's very much I'd take them with a pinch of salt, and I'll review them regularly as well. If we talk about what can we expect moving forward, I think to kind of look forward, you need to look back a little bit. If you look back at some of the previous recessions, one of the remuneration models that became more commonplace was payment by results. So essentially the client rewards or incentivizes on business outcomes rather than the media price paid. I think what's quite interesting, you may have seen in the trade press recently, Publicis Group launched about 3 weeks ago. It's a digital marketing service called The Pact, which essentially guarantees KPIs. So that could be things like new client acquisition, or offers a kind of 100% refund to clients. So going forward, it'll be interesting to see if coming out of coronavirus and the impact of that, whether we see a sort of similar resurgence of kind of payment by results models.
Thank you. And we just got a question. Is there a plan to reset the estimated media inflation forecast by the WFA? I want to say that we're trying to, but it's so unstable at the moment that it's actually quite hard for us to get some reliable data that's not going to change next week. So we have send me an email if you want to. I've got one from one partner, but we're trying to get more, and we're still waiting for it. So the person who wrote the question, I don't have your name, but just get in touch with me and then I'll send you what we have. Thank you. Yeah, and this is the last question about media inflation. So, media inflation is quite the holy grail for quite a lot of people. So how can you do without it? So for advertisers, we often use media inflation to plan for the future, or to calculate their savings. How can they better pilot the reality of the inflation depending on their profile of media consumption? What would you recommend practitioners to use to demonstrate their procurement action instead? And talking about savings mainly, what would be your advice?
I think there are a couple of options. So I mean, the first one I talked about is people kind of working through understanding the impact of deflation and then using a kind of third party to validate that, and your WFA figures stand true there. So in terms of how I'd recommend kind of doing that, I'd encourage the agency or ask your agency to forecast deflation or inflation, as it may become, on a quarterly basis by media channel, and then look to kind of validate that with the third party. The other thing that you need to have a look at as well is consider any changes in terms of media channel or kind of media owner spend, because are there pricing commitment targets that are no longer valid? Are there pricing commitment targets that can change because, let's say, you've cut a budget, you're not spending with that media owner anymore, or you've halved your spend with them as well? Once you've got those quarterly figures, it's almost like you can work through on a quarterly by quarter basis with your agency to look at what adjustments might be needed to pay, and maybe layer that up on an annual basis as well. But as I say, it's a highly kind of fluid situation. So I wouldn't, I wouldn't, for instance, be asking your agency. You may well ask them to forecast what Q4 inflation or deflation is, but you might not want to bake that into your commitment straight away, because it's very much dependent on a lot of external factors. The other thing, and this is more speaking from a kind of a big perspective, some of the clients we work with, we benchmark, we value track against kind of pricing commitments. Some of the others we use kind of pull bulk benchmarking for media such as TV. Some of them we use a combination of both. And actually, with the pool benchmarking, it's quite interesting in terms of kind of demonstrating the value of the agency, because in what's a highly fluid market, you can understand how your agency have delivered in terms of from a pricing perspective or a quality perspective, but then also you can understand with the benchmarking how they've delivered relative to the rest of the market. So those are the kind of two options I'd outline. I think for digital media, as is normally the case, the focus could be more on outputs and quality as opposed to necessarily the price paid in the first instance.
Thank you so much. You mentioned performance related remuneration models, and this is what we're going to talk about now. So we had, I think that question is more for you, Stuart. We had a question about performance related remuneration models in the case of e-commerce. So let me read it. So e-commerce sales have increased, and here we have agreed remuneration based upon net sales. Agency fees are increasing significantly, with much of the sales increase being down to Covid-19 and not really to the agency activity or to the agency interventions. So obviously these were agreed on a risk and rewards basis, but Covid was never a forecast or part of that picture. So should we continue to pay based upon the principles, risk reward nature of this type of agreements? Yes or no, and why?
Interesting. I mean, anecdotally, I was talking to, actually not a client of ours, just a colleague of mine actually, who runs a business which sells purely through Amazon, which is completely and utterly e-commerce. It's DIY products. Doesn't have an agency. The stuff is just on Amazon. And he saw, as we got into lockdown, sales just literally plummeted, and then 2 weeks in have gone completely through the roof. So I can sort of sympathise. I don't know what sector this client's in, but I can certainly sympathise that the COVID effect is definitely having a big effect on e-commerce. You've only got to look at the number of Amazon deliveries my wife seems to be having every day, actually, but that's by the by. It strikes me that, and without being able to look at this in any detail, it strikes me that the arrangement that they've got with their agency is a pretty blunt one. I don't know what the KPIs are, but if the agency's earning out of stuff just because it's working brilliantly well, then I would say that the KPIs have been quite bluntly set in the first place, or maybe not even KPIs. It's just base information. I mean, we traditionally would say on any performance-related fee basis that it's probably runs across hard measures, which is sales, which is maybe this, robust measures, which is stuff that the agency can actually affect. So propensity to purchase, attitude towards brand, and so on and so forth, and soft measures, which is agency performance, which is actually becoming increasingly important actually in a COVID environment where we're all in lockdown and the vast majority of people are working from home. I mean, if we take the comment, the last one of the earlier questions about what do I do if I can't get hold of my account director because they're looking after kids or whatever, then that's agency performance area. That's something you'd be marking them down on. So I think if the agency is earning an absolute fortune out of this and actually not doing very much work, then I think you certainly need to have a conversation with them. But I think you need to relook and recalibrate what your KPIs are and have that discussion with your agency. Because if they're sitting there doing nothing but earning a fortune out of it, that can't be right.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the advice even in our remuneration reports long before COVID-19 is to cap both ways. So if it goes super up or also super down in terms of sales, if you can't just be like too volatile. But yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if, for instance, I don't know what sector this client's in, but for instance, if the agency is working with British Airways or EasyJet or something on, you know, the number of tickets bought through an e-commerce website, then they're going slightly in the other direction. So I think, and of course, nobody could have predicted COVID. Nobody could have predicted what effect COVID might have had on e-commerce. I mean, hindsight has 20/20 vision, so maybe we should have anticipated that. But again, it depends on what sector you're operating in. But it just does underline the fact that you need to be very careful when you set KPIs in the first place and not organise it in a way which could have bad ramifications if stuff happens in the marketplace.
Thank you. And this leads me to the next question that is still about the same topic, but it's a bit more general. So how can I evolve my performance-based model to ensure that it's still relevant now and post-crisis? Do you think of any possible KPIs that they could use? Anything that would be a bit more manageable, controllable? Matt, do you have a view on that?
Well, I think just to build on the point that Stuart's made, I mean, he mentioned, you know, I talked a little bit about, and we talked about the incentive scheme here. So, you know, I talked about media buying performance KPIs and how to assess, you know, potential changes with that. In terms of agency performance, I think if you are, let's say you are a large FMCG advertiser, or no, but let's say, for instance, you've moved to more of an e-commerce based model, then that's going to have an impact potentially on the sort of questions by which you evaluate your agency performance. So, you know, you might be placing greater emphasis on evidence of optimization. Regular reporting might become more important, for instance. I obviously think if your business KPIs have changed considerably as well, there's definitely a conversation to be had there. One of the things that we've been kind of exploring with clients is whether you potentially have kind of two options. So one is an option now for how your kind of performance-based model might work, and the other is for a kind of, you know, post-lockdown situation. And whilst that might sound perhaps slightly sort of onerous and involve a bit more legwork to put it in place, what it does mean is that if you agree it up front with your agency, you're in a good position to pivot once we come out of lockdown and perhaps move back to a model that's perhaps more brand focused and perhaps more sort of e-commerce focused, for instance.
Thank you. Stuart, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've covered some of the points off in answering that earlier question. I mean, certainly we are seeing a lot of our clients. I mean, they were head down the first few weeks of lockdown, and as stuff was escalating here in the UK, but also as we work internationally with a lot of clients it's all happening in different phases, but everybody's going through precisely the same level of process. And then coming out of that, they're looking at what's going on with their marketing plans. They're looking at what's happening with their marketing plans, and they're spending time to talk with their agencies and adjust KPIs in line with what's going on in the marketplace. And it's, in honesty, it's a moving feast. I mean, the question says, what do we do now, and then also future-proof ourselves? I don't think anybody can quite predict what the future's going to be. I think it's something that you just need to monitor and keep an eye on, and maybe look at treating KPIs on a campaign-by-campaign basis rather than just on an overall basis. But certainly we're seeing quite a few clients moving stuff more into that softer area, agency performance, where the agencies are going the extra mile to deliver for clients, and also recognising excellence of work when it occurs.
And proactivity and support during the crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I heard of, it was in another webinar, helpfulness index or something like that. Could be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So my next question is quite broad, but as a brand, so, you know, there's a lot of members, WFA members trying to renegotiate their remuneration models. We had earlier in one of the questions, I think there was 53% of people thinking, oh, that would make my life easier if I was changing of remuneration model. Which innovative ways can I use to meet my new financial objectives without damaging relationships and health of my agencies? Do you have any advice on that? And I don't know if you want to get started.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, I think it's really important with something like this for procurement and marketing to work really, really closely together. I mean, it's a bit of a broad. My new financial objectives, it depends what those are, actually.
Probably a reduction, or, you know.
Yeah. But it depends. Is that a small reduction? Is it a moving around of scope of work? Is it cutting your budget by 90%? So it's on a case by case basis, I think, actually. But it's important, I think, for procurement and marketing to work really closely together. I think there's a number of things that you can do in your ways of working with agencies. I mean, I think you need to maintain pretty constant contact with them, communicate regularly, make sure that you've got a small team who are your day-to-day contacts who can then pass stuff off other people. Don't have too many meetings for the sake of it. Just keep those short and sharp. That keeps the time burn down as well from the agency perspective. And I think what you've got to remember is that we are all in this together. So whilst, you know, big corporations are suffering, agencies are suffering badly as well. I mean, we heard, literally this is going back actually about 6 weeks, 2 months ago, where a actually quite well-known global client actually was about to write a note to their agencies just asking them to cut their agency fees by 40%, just axes. And a discussion was had, shall we say, where we recommended that was not a very good idea, because at the end of the day, if you've got agencies that you value and they're true partners and they're delivering great work, you need to make sure they're there when we all come out of this. So supporting them throughout this is really important. And I think it's all down to discussions really as a tripartite with agencies, with marketing and with procurement, to look at the best possible solutions. Everybody realises that we've got issues, and everybody's doing their damnedest, I think, to try and make sure that everybody's accommodating other parties' needs. Just axing fees or cutting stuff without discussion isn't helpful. There are definitely ways which we can work together on this, I think.
Yeah, and you don't want your agencies to lose money on your account, because this is not really good for their financial health, and it may just
absolutely
a business anyway in the end.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it will be interesting when we eventually come out of this to see how many agencies survive the course. Certainly, smaller independent agencies are struggling very, very badly at the moment.
Yeah.
And what we don't want to lose, I don't think, is those independent agencies, because you get a lot of bright thinking from those. It's not to say you don't get bright thinking from larger networks, but we need to have choice there.
We had a member basically telling us in a meeting that they were trying obviously to reduce the agency fees, but to ensure that they're still covering the cost, you know, so at least the overheads, at least the salaries of the people, because these fees are not sort of deductible. So you may want to rearrange the workload and try to be more efficient, but there are some fees that you can't just reduce. So
yeah, and I mean, you know, for some client, if you're in if you're a multiple grocery outlet at the moment, then you're advertising like mad because people are going into grocery shops and shopping. And here in the UK, we're about to see wider retail open up. Be interested to see how much advertising is off the back of that. But equally, if you're in travel and tourism and leisure, it's a disaster zone. So you know, for every client that is spending more through their agencies because because they're in retail grocery, there are an awful lot who aren't spending very much at all. So I think it's just important as a group, tripartite group, you just talk and you're honest with each other about stuff.
Thank you. Matt, from a media perspective, do you think of any innovative ways to meet these new, the new are in a quotation mark, so the new financial objectives?
Yeah, I think, well, first up, I'd completely echo Stuart's point, just talking about real sort of, almost that sort of unscrupulous honesty and having that sort of empathy with agencies to truly treat them like partners, because I mean, experience will tell you that, you know, that empathy and that partnership approach, that will give you the access to the best agency talent and kind of think innovation going forward. In terms of just points to kind of think about in terms of how you might position it to the agency in the first instance. I mean, I talked about, you know, resurgence of payment by results before. Previous learnings from kind of downturns, if you're going to have to cut your base fee, maybe you have had a budget cut that's had a knock-on effect in terms of scope of work, and you have to offer the agency a reduced base fee. One way to potentially offset that is to have a larger upside on the performance-related fee. Now, what we may expect, based on some feedback we've had from agencies, we think that this time round that may get some pushback, simply because some of them had their fingers burned before with unrealistic kind of incentive targets that they've struggled to meet. Another one, I don't think it's particularly innovative, but if you've got to lower the base fee, then offering a contract extension, that's going to give the agency, they're going to avoid having to go to pitch earlier. That it avoids, that expense and the time that's required for that. I think in terms of how you kind of align it, your new model and your kind of terms with the agency. Yeah, I'd agree that I think it's just important to sort of between marketing and procurement be clear on exactly what you want, but have a think about the positioning as well. So if you're talking to your agency about having an evolved scope with business growth as a priority, that's likely to be better received than something that's viewed as a pure kind of cost-cutting exercise with it. Second point I'd kind of make with that is allow the agency to kind of input into specific areas so that they feel like they're almost kind of co-creating or helping contribute to the final remuneration scheme. And the final point, we often develop on behalf of clients renegotiation briefs. We find they work particularly well in these situations simply because it provides clear objectives for the advertiser and for the agency in terms of where you want to get to. It highlights the areas where the agency needs to feed back, and also it sets out a timeline for implementation as well. So it just makes sure that all parties are clear.
Thank you. I'm going to add a few questions that we got in the chat box. Talking about new remuneration models, what do you recommend doing if you have a retainer and the agency is claiming that they're doing more work now and want more money, but the business is down 50% of clients?
Well, it depends. If the agency is claiming they're doing more work and you've increased the scope, then yeah, the agency should be paid for doing that extra work, I would say. Makes sense.
Yeah. So
I mean, if the scope of work hasn't changed and the agency is saying, oh, we're having to do more hours because it takes more time to do stuff via Zoom and so on and so forth, then I think you need to have a discussion with them. But if the scope's gone up, then you should pay them for it. If it's the same, then you need to talk to the agency about ways in which they can be more efficient.
Yeah, and I guess this is one of the...
So I think a lot of these issues are, it's a matter of having grown-up conversations, I think, with agency counterparts.
Mm-hmm. And transparent ones, yeah.
Yeah,
thank you. Stuart, is there a trend to blend hourly rates across different disciplines, the digital, PR, etc.?
The old blended rate. Agencies love blended rates. We hate them. The problem with blended rates is, I mean, even if it's just against, let's say it's across creative agencies, where you've got and we do see this happening from time to time, where you've got agencies who are operating in 10 different countries across Europe, and they set a blended rate for an account director. And you're sitting here in London and you look at the blended rate of the account director and you go, actually, that's pretty good value. That's quite a bit less than I'm normally paying for an account director. Well, that's fine, other than the fact that your account director in Bratislava or in Warsaw, that amount of money is what a CEO would be being paid in that marketplace. So and especially if it's central payment to a central agency hub, it's just it's unrealistic. You're not really necessarily getting to what you're paying people in the individual markets. To try and blend across disciplines is even worse, because agency types have different types of overheads. They have different salary structures and so on and so forth. So if you're trying to blend, you know, PR, what were they again, Laura? PR, digital,
and Metcom. I guess there's a type.
Marcomms, oh, so creative, yeah. They're all going to be on quite different rates. So to try and do a blended rate on that, you're not sure really what you're paying for. You're not, and also the difficulty with blended rates is you can end up getting much more junior people working on the business, because there'll be junior people in the construct. I mean, one can argue that FTEs are sort of a blended rate, but at least when you look at FTEs, you know what the composition of that FTE cost is. Just having blended rates we would not recommend going with that at all. Please.
Is that something, that's fine. Matt, I don't know if, is that something you've seen with media agencies as well, or like hourly rates, or do you sort of align with Stuart saying just run away from these guys?
Yeah, I agree with Stuart. I think that you'd, you know, broadly speaking, the most successful advertiser agency partnerships are built on a transparent kind of comms supply chain. And if you're blending your rates by discipline or blending your rates by by seniority of staff, then as an advertiser you're unlikely to have true visibility of who's actually doing the work on your business.
I mean, you know, from a procurement person's point of view, it's easier because you're dealing with one figure, so it's just easier to work with. But the reality is, it's got about as much transparency as my glazed door, actually.
Thank you so much. We spoke about working more than usual, and this is leading me to my next question. So with some projects, and I guess especially in production, now requiring more time due to new safety or sanitary measures, and I guess that person is sort of trying to project herself or himself in the future when it all goes back to some normal, when we can go to the office or to a production house. How can I mitigate the increase of the agency time spent on delivering work and overall fee? Because they're going to have to spend more time, you know, complying with sanitary safety measures and stuff. What would be your advice to mitigate the increase of that time spent, and potentially, if you go hourly rate-based remuneration, the increase of the salary?
Well, I think if you look across Europe, then pretty much billable hours are 1,600, 1,650 maybe. Asian states it's about 1850, 1880. So if you actually look at that, that leaves people with an awful lot of time for popping to the loo, having a coffee break, washing their hands, so on and so forth. So I think our view on that would be it shouldn't really make a difference. I mean, one of the things which we have, interestingly enough, what we have seen on production activities, so TV commercials or whatever, then that does take an awful lot longer to set up and make happen. So that's the downside. But the upside is, because of the requirements that are needed in live action shoots, instead of a crew of 45 people hanging around in a full catering van and so on and so forth, you've got the artist, you've got a sound recorder who will also be carrying the boom, you've got a lighting cameraman, you've got the cameraman, you've got the director. So you've got 5 people, plus maybe 1 person from the agency. So your overall costs for live production are necessarily going to be an awful lot lower than they would traditionally be. So a few extra hours for nipping out and putting a bit of sanitizer on your hands, I think is neither here nor there, frankly.
Thank you. And we just got a comment from a member as well saying, actually, we are now requiring a COVID-19 clearance of all scripts and SB. I'm sorry, I feel silly. I don't know what SB means. To be done by our production partners. So far, we have mitigated the cost through script adjustments and by decoupling production from agency to production house directly. So hopefully that's an additional advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, and everybody, I'm sure it's the same in all markets. Actually, we just see TV commercials, which look like what we're looking at here. Just lots of people on Zoom calls. So they actually tend to sort of, one commercial tends to blur into another. You're not really sure who they're for. That will change. Agencies are trying to look at different ways of doing stuff, but certainly if you've got the agency can't start writing scripts, you know, we open on a sun-kissed beach, because that's simply not going to happen. But we are going to get more live action stuff shot outdoors and in various locations. And yeah, then it's just a matter of putting it into a production house or post-prod or decouple it. So yeah, you should be able to mitigate against costs quite well on that basis.
Thank you. My next question is, in the case there is some more time spent by agencies, what is the usual way to pay overtime to agencies? Is there like a certain percentage on top of the agreed remuneration to add? What have you seen so far? And I know you laugh because you're like, well, agencies usually don't get paid for overtime.
They don't. No.
But in case, you know, this is happening, what would be your what did you see?
I haven't seen any evidence of it at all, actually, to be honest with you. But I'm sure that people are logging their hours and their time and so on and so forth. Whether that's outside of their sort of billable hours of 8 hours a day or 7.5 hours a day or whatever, it's probably difficult. It's difficult to measure in the 3-month period or 2-month period that we've had the lockdown here in the UK or in other markets. But agencies shouldn't be charging overtime.
No, all I'd say on that as well is if their actual hours are exceeding, if you're on an FTE model or a fixed fee model, for instance, and the actual billable hours are exceeding what's planned, then there should be a grown-up conversation about it. Yeah. So, you know, is there and you've got two options. It's a bit like, look, we're massively over here in terms of planned hours. We're in the middle of this project. You know, either we agree a fee extension. Now that may not be feasible, or secondly, we talk about is there any areas of the scope where we can reduce that down in terms of the agency's scope to maintain the same fee.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in many respects, I think in terms of what agencies are producing, the way they're doing it isn't normal, but it's business as normal. So I don't think there's any rationale for suddenly changing all arrangements as time to pay overtime on stuff. Doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you. I've got one last question that we received, and I've got one question in the chat box. My last question is about prepayments. So should we offer more prepayments? I assume it's quite a popular practice in production, but would we see this appearing with other agency types? You know, don't know, creative agency, you would offer some degree of prepayments, and what percentage do you think would you expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen too much. I mean, obviously on production stuff, prepayment is always 50% up front before people will start to organise shoots or whatever. The same with photography. But for agencies, we haven't seen any evidence of prepayment. What we have seen is quite a lot of clients paying really quickly. So clients who have traditionally been on 45 or 60 days are paying on 7 to 10. So that's helping agencies cash flow, but it's paying for work that's been done rather than money up front.
Or paying on time, actually raising the PO as soon as you get it, not just.
Well, that of course is a consistent problem that agencies have, is that they can't bill because they can't get POs away.
Yeah.
So that's something I think clients can look at to try and aid the process somewhat.
Yeah, just I was going to say, this obviously refers to kind of production and creative, but I think one point that's quite interesting. So clearly, a lot of media owners are now offering kind of more prepayment deals, and our understanding is that these aren't always being passed on from the agency to the advertisers. Yeah. So
yeah, we've heard that.
What I'd encourage you to do with your agency teams in terms of media buying is ask what prepayment discounts are available from media owners and take advantage of those wherever possible.
Thank you. I'll take the last question in the chat before we're running over time, I'm sorry, but this is the last one. What are your thoughts on subscription rate model? Pre-agreed exclusive agency subscription model covers everything you need from your agency. Have you heard of that? And then what do you think of it, if you've heard of it?
No, I'm not aware of it.
Pre-agreed exclusive agency subscription model. Oh, well, that's going to be an easy one. Okay. Well,
I'm not ahead of it either.
I'll get back to that member and then get some more details, and then we can follow. I can follow.
Happy to respond when we're sure what it is.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much to you both. Thank you to everyone in the call who stayed until the end. If you have some more questions, feel free to get back to me over email, and then I can pass them on to Matt and Stuart. Thank you so much to you both as well for joining us. Have a very good afternoon.
That's all right. Thanks.
And
thanks. Hope it was useful. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. See you then. Okay, bye.